I love to hear people's stories, and I would love if you would tell us, how did you become a medical intuitive? These stories are always so fascinating.
Yeah, it was kind of a long and windy route, but I think it's an important story for a lot of people who come to medical intuitives. I started out on the other side of the gurney, so to speak. I was the person who was very sick. I had a medical mystery. It took my doctors 10 years to diagnose me with my heart condition. And so I was going to all kinds of healers and naturopaths and therapists and really, struggling. And so that taught me a lot of compassion. And it really put me on the path to becoming a medical intuitive because I went to see a medical intuitive on my father's advice. And she told me that I needed to develop my gifts in order to get better. And I had had gifts since I was born, but I had a kind of uneasy relationship with them. I would kind of love them, hate them. And so I would get training from time to time as I was growing up from different traditional healers, but they always approached me. I never sought it out. And I was trying to just live a regular life. I had a very kind of mainstream academic life where I was pursuing multiple degrees, became a professor. And then in the middle of that, I started to get some serious training in psychic development and healing. And it was in the context of those courses that my medical intuition gift came out really strongly. And so in my classes, the teacher would say, oh, do a reading on your classmate. And I would always get medical information. I took mediumship and we're bringing through spirit. And I was always getting cause of death and illness for the deceased. And so my teacher said to me, you have this gift. It's very rare. You should focus on this. And there weren't any teachers for medical intuition back then. And so I tried to find, medical intuition courses. I even went to a couple of workshops that were called medical intuition, but clearly were not. They were just like intuition classes. And what I had to do was, I had studied with a lot of different, healers and teachers and mediums. And then I had to form my own medical intuition circle. And I was actually able to get my teachers to join the circle with me because by that time I had advanced enough that we were colleagues of sorts. Although I wasn't practicing professionally, I was still a philosophy professor. I had, no intention of ever doing this for work. And so I thought, but I was just wanting to help people. And so we just formed a circle. We started having people just give us people's names, people we didn't know. And we would just use the name and do scans on them remotely. And then I would type up these 10-page reports and mail them off. And then we would wait for the feedback. And that's how we developed. And then I started just volunteering, at churches, at metaphysical bookstores, just doing sessions for all my friends and family and getting feedback, more and more feedback, practice. And eventually I did hang a shingle and start working professionally in Los Angeles. And I worked as a professional medical intuitive for the last 12 years.
Wow. I knew it's going to be an interesting story. They always are. Now, so I want to ask you, because so many of the people that I've talked to, they have it's just a different way that it expresses. So when you are scanning somebody, are you seeing, are you hearing, tasting? What kind of information comes to you?
Well, I might be unique among medical intuitives in that I use all of the clairs. And so I use clairvoyance, clairseeing, I use clairaudience, clairhearing, I use clairsentience to pull the person's symptoms into my body and then examine myself. I use claircognizance to scan lists of ailments. I use telepathy where I actually talk to the organs. And I use something called resonance, which I kind of made up, which is where I listen to information that comes in between people's words when they're telling me the story of their illness. And so I combine all of those gifts. And so I receive information in so many different ways. I see inside the body. I can feel their symptoms. I can feel their emotions. And then I can actually hear their organs talking to me. And then I just get claircognitive, which is like, just really quick hits of true, false, yes, no, or, and sometimes I'll hear the name of an ailment. So I use all of those gifts together, and that's how I teach my students to do medical intuition. And that's in part because of my training. One of the mediums that trained me back in Casadega, I was trained in a spiritualist community, among other places, was an evidential medium. And we were taught to use all of our clairs. And a lot of times we're born with a very strong clair, like we're born clairvoyant, we see, or we're born clairsentient, we're empathic, we feel. And a lot of times people will just kind of rely on that gift, their strong gift, to work. And so you'll see a lot of medical intuitives who are clairvoyants, or they're clairsentients. But my teacher, Maida Jones, she insisted that we had to work on our weakest gifts. And we had to have all of our, gifts. And she taught me that. And that's how I teach now. I said, no matter if you think, oh, I've never heard, I'm never going to be a clairaudient. Yes, you are. You're going to be a clairaudient. You're going to practice until you can do it. And having all of those gifts on board, it's just a lot easier to get more information.
Right. So do you find that because you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox, do different people deliver the messages in different ways, if that question makes sense?
Well, the delivery of what you get is really half of it. So much of what makes a medical intuitive a good medical intuitive is how she or he is able to deliver information in a way that the client can hear it, and in a way that's not going to be upsetting. And so that's another thing I teach, is the importance of language and of being very, very sensitive and careful with how you phrase things, and being tuned in to the client to know, how do they need to hear things? So for example, when I have people come to me as clients who are medical professionals, I tend to get a lot of the session in medical terminology and like anatomy, because they need to hear it that way, because for them, that's what makes it authentic. And there are other people, if I were to use all those terms, they would be put off or they would be confused. And so with other people, I have to use more general language. And then also I find that I have to use vague language when it comes to something very serious or disturbing. So, and I have to avoid certain language. So for example, I never tell my clients they have cancer, because cancer is so loaded. People just are so terrified of cancer that if you say the word cancer, people immediately think they're going to die. And then you could have a self-fulfilling prophecy there. Someone just thinks cancer and then they will themselves to death unconsciously, right? And so then I also will use vague language. I'll say things like, well, you have a condition which, if you don't address it, it could turn into cancer, right? And I might say, this is urgent. You need to go to the doctor tomorrow and have this test run. And I'll say it like, if they need to hear it urgently, I'll say it urgently. But if it's someone who's already afraid, then I'm going to be more careful. And, I had this funny instance where I was working with a nurse, and of course I didn't know she was a nurse. I never know much about my clients because I don't want to know upfront anything about them. And so a lot of times I don't know who I'm talking to, and then they'll tell me afterwards. And this person was a nurse, and I was giving her language about what was going on with her adrenal glands, and she had cancer in her adrenal glands, but I didn't want to say cancer. So I was like, hey, this is the test you should get, go to your doctor and ask for this test. And then, then he'll be able to, her doctor was a man at the time. He'll be able to, treat this. Well, she was a nurse, so she knew what that test was. And so afterwards she said, well, you just confirmed what I already suspected. I have adrenal cancer, and you just confirmed that because the test you told me to get is a test for adrenal cancer. So I thought I was being slick. But yeah, language is really important, how you deliver it.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey at lisabonis.com. In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924, Disaster struck. 3 explosions trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabunnies.com.